Bench Opinions. Three idiots with amateur analysis.
Bench Opinions Rugby. Welcome back.
Hello.
Today is Wednesday. There was an episode yesterday about football where Dominic has rejoined the fold and gave his insights onto all the different leagues that are currently happening and going into
I also was part of that, but you know.
Well, you've been part of the fold the entire time. Dominic
Yeah.
has just recently rejoined after a spat of illness, which is,
Spat of illness.
by the sounds of it, is gone now, which is good.
His illness.
He spat his
There
illness
was a lot of
out.
spitting. It was true.
And did you watch any of the rugby on the weekend? There was a bit of European Champions
No,
Cup.
this is one of those weeks also where I'm like, I actually don't even know what's happening. So,
But to be fair, you were in Leipzig. You were watching some football live.
but
so
I think out of all the competitions, these are the ones I probably, unless there was a South African team that I believed could win it.
Yeah, this is what we're going to get into because this is exactly what we need to address as a South Africa.
So
As a South Africa.
Yeah.
So the thing that we want to discuss on the channel today is the fact that two teams have now exited. One had already exited. That was the Stormers, unfortunately, earlier on in the competition. Two more have exited this week. That would be the Lions and the Sharks.
So, I mean, just to explain to those who didn't know, the Stormers were out because they played so terribly they didn't even
Make the playoffs.
And the Bulls, the Sharks, dropped down from the Champions Cup to the Challenge Cup and then had another chance at another go at it now. And with the Lions, who had progressed from their group, and the Sharks especially shit the bed.
Yeah,
I think the Lions, if we're going to be fair, I think they're going to struggle in European knockout rugby because that's hectic. You know, they get picked apart in South Africa as a franchise, and to even get through the group stage, I think for the Lions should be.
Yeah.
They should be fine with that.
Yeah, I'd also like to exempt them from all the critique we're going to be giving the South African franchises about this particular competition or competitions. As you've alluded to, it's just extremely difficult for them to go up north and try and compete in this competition. The fact that they have managed to get as far as they have is pretty impressive. They just don't have the squad depth to be able to rotate enough to get their good players over to that competition and then still be competitive in the URC, which is evidently all of the franchises, South African franchises, priority that's what it seems to be like.
With Jake White resting players when they were still in the Champions Cup to focus on the URC.
Yeah,
like. We also probably have to preface all of this conversation saying the Sharks are defending champions in the Challenge Cup. So there has been a little bit of success there, but it's been talking points in other rugby media that we've been invited into the pinnacle of European rugby and
maybe even of club rugby worldwide,
especially now with the way Super Rugby was. I think when Super Rugby was at its pinnacle, you could have argued that it was there was a lot of equity there, but we've been invited to partake, and now we need to show these two tournaments the adequate amount of respect.
Which I don't believe we're doing.
No, definitely this season not doing.
Definitely this season not. Even in previous seasons, not all franchises, but the likes of like the Bulls, for example, have made it very, very clear and have been quite outspoken about the fact that we're not really going to compete in this. We're rather going to, we'll send players over and they can have a run, but we'll use it more as a training sort of exercise and then keep our players for other competitions.
I've been reading a little bit about it as well, and someone alluded to it maybe being a sort of quote unquote protest from some of the people that are some of the rugby heads in South Africa. And he questioned the two possible angles. The one angle being that someone like a Jake White is essentially protesting and saying you're expecting too much of us with the resources that we have as rugby men.
Yeah.
And the other angle is the South African unions protesting, but also strong-arming the European sides into rejigging the whole way the whole structure works. And the guy then, the journalist, obviously it's also just opinion, he kind of said, at the end of the day, South Africa are now through the door. The South African unions know what they bring in terms of TV viewership, commercial value, and he says he thinks they might be trying to call the Challenger Cup and the Champions Cup's bluff by saying we're in it now. look what we bring to the table, help us compete, or help the whole competition be more
But
even.
is that, in my opinion, that works in the URC, because that's something where South Africa's participation has actually given the tournament life, and it's whether they want to admit it or not. The other unions, the other countries in those competitions needed that sort of input of viewership and of competition. The Heineken Cup, or the Champions Cup and the Challenge Cup, in my opinion, don't. We don't have.
Well, this is his argument. His argument
Yeah.
is that there is essentially the South African unions are banking or
Yeah.
taking the risk and banking on their own commercial and their own value to the competition, and they've obviously set a certain value to what they bring to the competition, and believe it's enough to be able to kind of try and force them to the table.
I would argue that it's more of an inability or lack of South African rugby ever having to deal with this sort of amount of competition and squad management. With the way we used to play our rugby, which was Currie Cup and Super Rugby, and Currie Cup and Super Rugby had a small overlap. But that just meant that a lot of the under 23s or whatever would play your Currie Cup. Like, it was very clearly separated, and the Super Rugby was your main tournament, and it was separate. Now you have to, almost like in football, you have to look at your squad, and you have to say, right, at the beginning of the season, what's our aim? So let's say the Stormers want to make it to the semi-finals of the Heineken Cup, which I think they have the squad depth to do. They just need to they need to manage it right. So you have to go in the beginning of the season, you have to look at all your URC games, you have to look at your Heineken Cup games, and then you have to look at your pool of players. And maybe it has to be larger than it is currently. We've got such incredible depth of talent in South Africa. I think we have to use it differently. And it's, I think, an inability to do that. And if then down the line you maybe get a little bit more momentum and you start actually qualifying for the knockout rounds in the Champions Cup, then maybe you've got more cards in your hand to then be like, listen, is there a way we can restructure this tournament so that travel for the for the South African teams becomes better?
You think having a larger squad would equal the ability to be able to compete at that many competitions? Because it's not like, I'm just going to use football as an example. Football is a lot less contact heavy than rugby is naturally, and so you are able to play the same player maybe twice a week even.
Yeah.
Whereas in rugby, it's a lot more contact heavy. Injuries are more likely to occur. To be able to compete in all of those different games, you would have to rotate the squads almost completely and almost have like two different squads competing in different
But that's what
competitions.
Leinster did now when they travel to South Africa.
And that's what a lot of the teams coming down from Europe
Europe
do.
do.
And I think it
and
is
they're competitive.
it's 100% a case of boxing clever.
Yeah.
You have to box clever. You have to go. And I don't think, as you said, I don't think the sides are doing it. I think Jake White, when he sends a second string side, it's not in the vein of, this is how many points I want to take out of the 4 games that I'm playing
It's literally
overseas.
just,
And this is the right, it's,
Come.
well, write that off, just do your
Yeah.
thing. And at least I gather from when Leinster, look, we're also comparing them to the best side this season by a long stretch, but other teams do it as well, that they send somewhat weakened teams, and there seems to be some thought behind it.
Yeah.
And they do pick up, they compete at least, and they do pick up results.
Leinster's under 23s basically beat the Sharks.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to get onto the Sharks a little bit later, but that's
Yeah.
if your second string team is competitive enough, you can send it overseas to go play against some of the teams in the group stages of the Heineken Cup. I think it's manageable. Or when those games match maybe with a few games in the URC, then your weakened team can play in the URC. Because I think what it seems like now is that you're caught in this cycle of South African teams want to qualify for the knockout rounds in the URC because that comes with financial benefits, and it comes with the benefit of qualifying for the Champions Cup, which comes with more financial benefit. But then when you've qualified for that cup, there seems to be no incentive to actually move on in that competition and go far, because then you concentrate again on the next season's Heineken Cup and qualifying for it again in the URC. So it's almost like get your foot in the door, and then when you're in the door, you're like, I just want to hang out.
By no means am I trying to find an excuse here. The thing is, something that we need to consider is also our geographical location. and the fact that it is the European Champions Cup, i.e. we have to travel a lot, sometimes 14, 16 hours. Our guys are not getting business class seats like one would imagine professional athletes to get, especially if you're looking at a guy like Nklabakanya who weighs 150 kilograms. Putting him in premium economy is just not going to cut the mustard.
Okay, but
is that then also something where the teams are going, it's too taxing on our players, purely travel base?
Well, they would have had to fly to New Zealand and Australia beforehand in Super Rugby.
And we struggled in those games as well.
Yeah, but we were competitive in those those
knockout
leagues.
games and actually won some of them. Yeah,
Some of them out.
The
But
Crusaders were by out the best, but we regularly made it into the knockout rounds of Super Rugby, and
But the thing about Super Rugby, which was very evident, was whichever team had the home ground advantage was usually the team that won statistically. That was a massive problem. The only team that really went against the grain of that was the Crusaders. And the Crusaders is like the Leinster of today or the Toulouse of today. They're just an unbelievable side for many, many years.
I think when you're going to get unlucky draws in the Champions Cup where you play Toulouse at home, right? Like the Sharks did, and then it doesn't matter if you're at home or you're there. You're going to struggle regardless. But we're not winning our home games against some of these European Cup teams in the URC or in the Champions Cup.
I think Toulouse actually played Sharks in Durban.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I'm saying you get unlucky draws where your Leinsters or Toulouses will come to South Africa, and then your home ground advantage could almost be negated because they're so good.
They're so brilliant,
But other teams come across, and Sale Sharks came across. It's you're not using your home ground advantage. Nobody's flying anywhere in economy, and then you're not going to Europe and at least structuring both competitions, URC and Champions Cup, in such a way that you'll have some losses in the URC to win a few group games in the Champions Cup.
Yeah,
it seems. I think the financial strains that South African franchises are in constantly probably has to be looked at, because it's almost like in football where it has to be run a little bit like a business, and you have to try and qualify competitions purely to qualify for competitions.
Yeah.
Just to get that participation money in. But that sort of takes a little bit of the chutzpah out of it.
I think devil's advocate, though, on the other side, the argument could be is that maybe it's a bit too early to judge the South African sides in this regard. I think if you look at the way these structures are built up, it takes a long time to figure things out, because it's not okay. If you're managing a squad of, I don't know, what will probably end up being close to 40 players, like as a pool, if ideally, I think to get the dynamic right there, considering that a lot of players are on contracts that still have 3 years left on them, you've got new young guys coming through. I think maybe it is just too early to judge the obviously judge them for their play in the games, but I think this aspect, maybe one has to give it another couple of years, and it's something that they have to try and figure out.
But with the added, not give it a couple of years, but you have to change something.
No, sure, 100%.
You can't continue just doing it like.
And I think
like
the fact that we're speaking about it, and the fact that the rugby community in South Africa is very vocal about it, whether it's critical, like someone like Jake White is super critical, or it's some whatever voices like very
the guys on the box office are also
respected voices, and the fact that they're talking about it, I think generally one would hope the insiders in these unions usually tend to be talking about it even earlier. So
what is the solution? Take time, grow your squad depth.
I think it takes time for a union to adapt to two such big competitions, which I think the URC now is, along with Challenge and Champions Cup. But in my opinion, I actually also think that one of the solutions is, I think the Cheetahs are actually on their last legs currently as a union in South Africa. I know that they had a game, I don't know if it was on the weekend or if it's next weekend, to qualify for the Curry Cup or something like that. And if they don't qualify, then
I think
Frans Steyn said
the
union is going to go
under.
They're going to shut their doors. Is it maybe right to try and pull more of the talent in South Africa into the four main franchises?
It's an interesting
Bring
point.
the cats back.
It's an interesting. Well, I mean, the cats still exist.
The solution to all of this is just to unify the Cheetahs and the Lions under the Cats.
Yeah, no, well, that's what they used to be.
Yeah.
The Cats was Free State and the Lions.
So if you look at a team like the Sharks, who have got a lot of private equity in them, and they've been able to buy every good player under the sun. You could argue they've got the squad depth, and they should be
do.
able to compete in
Yeah.
all competitions
They do.
But we've
across the
spoken
world.
very blatantly about this, and it's I think it's hard to understand how Plumtree is still there.
For sure.
It's impossible to understand it.
It's the Sharks is also a strange one now, because the Sharks have first the starting 23, let's say, are all superstars. But then yesterday in the game against Lyon, they had
sent
to
none of them.
they had to put on some weaker guys, and they're really good rugby players, but they'll get so little exposure when that first team is ready, just because I think the coach hasn't understood how to rotate squad properly. It's exposing young players like Rassie Erasmus does to a few games where he can get some confidence and get some knowledge under of how the game is played. And then when you have to put him in because there's no other way to put to field a team against a Lyon, then he'll still compete.
And this is something I want to get into. Are the Sharks ruining South African franchises by buying up all the players and then not letting the best players in South Africa get enough game time to actually compete and hone their skills, and then maybe even become, future Springboks?
I don't think so. And the reason I say this is because there's been the Bulls for years were not on this level, but the Bulls within South African rugby, from when I can remember in the early 2000s, did what the Sharks did. Soon as someone got good enough, they snapped them up, and they used to gut other unions, and that's why they were so dominant in the Currie Cup for so many years, for example, and whatever. So I don't think it's that easy for the other unions to
Point the finger. And
I think the only reason we even question it as South African rugby fans is the fact that they're poorly coached and they're not executing.
Yeah.
Because I think if they're going out and winning all these competitions, you're going, this is good for in my opinion, this is good for South African rugby. And I think generally it is, because I think for us to remain competitive, we want interest to be high in South African rugby, whether it's through the Sharks or through any other kind of investment.
I know what you're trying to allude to, but I agreed with Dom. I think what you're seeing maybe 10, 15 years down the line is a sort of Irish rugby scenario where you have one superstar union like Leinster and all the others are sort of just fighting off the scraps, and that might be a possibility of it turning out like that. But I think with the Sharks, in addition to them buying the best players, they also have an incredibly, incredibly good academy and youth system. They pump out so many young players who then feed into the other unions. So I think it's a possibility that it's not good for rugby. But I think, like Dom said, if they were winning, I think that would currently at this level be more positive than it would be negative for South Africa. I think the negative part of it is they're buying all our good players from other unions and they're terrible.
Yeah.
And or they just don't use them at all.
Yeah.
And I think the potential for further growth, and nothing stops a similar thing happening at the Stormers, where someone comes in and says, we want part of the pie, and the game continues to grow in South Africa.
Yeah.
So, and I think particularly in the context of someone like the Cheetahs possibly going under, any foreign money for me, obviously we want them to perform and do it in a sustainable and proper way, is a positive.
I think with the state of South African rugby is probably the Sharks are let's take them out of it, because they can offer players bigger contracts than the other unions can be. Willie Leroux has now decided to extend with the Bulls, which shows that the Bulls have probably a different kind of pull. I think they'll also struggle to keep young players like in their late 20s who really want to earn some big money, because you're seeing it now with the Stormers as well, with now Damian Willemse being the next one to be heavily linked with a move to Leinster.
Yeah.
And the attitude in South Africa almost has to be these days, you've got to let them go.
Yeah.
It's not a negative for the Springboks because they'll gain experience somewhere else. It might be a negative for that franchise because they're losing a superstar player at its peak. But he can come back. He can come back when he's 31, 32, still add massive value like a Dion Fourie did when he came back. But unions essentially need to pump out so much talent to how do you say to annul that to all that talent that's leaving through the European door as well. And we've got such a big talent factory in schoolboy, university, and club rugby in South Africa, and maybe one has to look at how that can better be funneled into the professional teams.
Losing the likes of a superstar as Damian Willemse, do you think that hurts the franchises in terms of fan, not loyalty, but fan attendance, buying merch, all of that sort of stuff? Because traditionally, those big superstars have brought with them a fan base and have brought with them buying power and stuff like that. And you kind of start losing interest when your superstar who plays for the Springboks is no longer appearing in your local stage.
Yeah. I think if I look at it from a Stormers perspective, I don't think so, because the Stormers, they have so many good local young players that come through that Cape Town and Cape Townians can identify with, and the Cape Town rugby fans. And they do tend to stay longer than others. If you're looking at it from a Lions perspective, definitely. I think it's terrible. I think it's whenever you sort of just start to put a run together and there's individuals like Edwil van der Merwe who are really taking your union to the next level, next year they're gone. And you're just starting from scratch again. It's to be a Lions fan, which I'm so glad I made the conscious decision not to be, must be extremely frustrating. And it's just because how do you compete with that? Because I don't think there's anyone who comes to the Lions from other unions at their peak.
No, very, very seldomly does that happen.
And I think that
Willem Alberts maybe when he came when he was 38 years old.
But I think for the Lions, there's also a different problem of Johannesburg is currently going through a really tough time politically, economically, and when the city becomes less attractive for players, that makes it even harder for anyone to come. The Stormers are super blessed. I think life in KwaZulu-Natal is not always breezy, but you've also, I think, as a rugby player, you can find your little
your northern suburbs
are nice.
I think the main problem in Joburg in terms of attendance is just the location of the stadium.
Yeah.
If you look at the location of the stadium in Cape Town, it's, could you get any better? I don't know if that's even possible.
Then one has to ask the almost sacrilege question of, would it be beneficial for the Lions to play somewhere else?
Yes.
Yeah. But then
the question is where?
Where?
That's the big problem.
Well, it would have to be a new stadium because there's nothing currently.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
There's nothing currently that exists in the suburbs that are super into the Lions that could host something like that.
Honestly, I would go to Wits, play at their grounds.
But now we're moving like a kilometer.
But a kilometer way out of the shit and into a much better part of town.
Yeah.
Because, look, the Stormers have been playing at Stellies a couple of times. When
they do play at Stellies. They play terribly there.
They play terribly there, but it just goes to show that Stadium. It is possible.
Yeah. It's possible. I think it's beneficial for rugby fans when it's more in an area of people who like to go watch rugby. Unfortunately, Joburg CBD and downtown Joburg is just not. It's
not a place you want to be hanging around.
It's not a place you want to be, and no one there can afford to go watch rugby. No one there. Rugby is not something that's on their agenda because survival is something that you look at there.
Yeah.
But then Ellis Park would probably die out, and that's something that one would just have to be super honest about.
The thing is, apparently, from what I've seen, it's a white elephant anyway.
Yeah.
So the stadium doesn't generate money. So, and that's one of the reasons the unions are so crippled, is because they're overpaying for a stadium that no one visits.
Yeah.
And so it's all kind of goes hand in hand. And we saw it with Newlands. Let it go. Just let it go, because look at Cape Town Stadium now and what it's done for the Stormers.
Yeah, but then the Lions can't afford to build a new stadium. I think where
that's true. Yeah.
Stormers are lucky that the Cape Town could offer them a different one, but it's just tough to see, because
this is a wild thing, but Co use Loftus.
Yeah.
It's wild, but Co use Loftus. It's so a massive part of the Lions fan base are in West Joburg.
Yeah.
Get on the highway. They're at Loftus in 40 minutes.
And they have done co-hosted double headers there.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, you're right. Maybe because I think even Loftus struggles to fill itself even for big games. So that would at least add a different.
And then Saturdays in local South African rugby are double headers between the Lions and the Bulls.
Yeah.
It's a left of field suggestion, but
Well, I mean, you'd have to strict schedule it so that they're always alternating who's playing home games, because I don't think you can play 2 games on that turf after one another.
they've done it before.
That's what
Have
we're,
they?
that's
Yeah.
what we're just talking about.
Just-
Yeah.
Doesn't it get torn up to shreds?
I don't think so.
When it's dry, it's usually fine.
Okay.
Then you just have to change the seats to purple because currently they're blue.
Well, as you've heard, we've got all the solutions for all of South African rugby.
Just give us a call and we'll help you out, guys.
I'm still drawing up the plan for Irish rugby, but I will be with you shortly.
And on that bombshell, I think it's time to say goodbye. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and comment.
Even if you didn't.
If you've got
dick.
any of your own solutions, maybe pop us a text. Other than that, have a lovely week and thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Goodbye.